welcome again to Friendships That Flourish, the podcast, where we dive into the intricacies of building and nurturing meaningful connections that stand the test of time. I am your host friend, Regina Nicole, and today we have sitting on the couch with us, Natalie as your friend, who will be discussing the topic of building strong friendships through vulnerable connections and communication. All right, so welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Regina. It's so awesome to be here.
Oh, thank you. So I like to, thank you for coming. I like to start off by asking, what does it mean when I say friendships that flourish? What does that mean to you?
That is like a deep sentence. Basically, I would say flourishing friendships is basically like communication is great. You are real and honest. It's raw, vulnerable, understanding. I think if it's all of that, I think you can make it to be a beautiful thing.
Okay, so you said communication, raw and honest. So let's dive into what does that mean to you, being raw and honest, and then I'll share.
Just being able to be your true self. I think if two people are able to be honest with each other, then you can conquer anything. And I feel like if you have that stability, things will flourish through thick and thin. However long you've known each other, I think it'll work better if you have to be raw with each other. You're able to be honest through any season that may be difficult.
Very good. Okay, so I had a conversation with a friend, and one of the things that she mentioned about a friendship that flourished, she mentioned integrity, accountability. And so I'm going to add to that what you mentioned about being raw and honest and, having communication. I always talk to people about the only way that relationships, specifically friendships in this matter, flourish is by being having grace, giving the other person and even yourself in the relationship, as you mentioned, in any season, like giving the grace to evolve, the grace of we may drop the ball, and so as a friend, in order for that relationship to flourish, is accountability, being integral, being open and honest, being raw, and giving grace to ourselves and those involved. So thank you for that.
I agree.
All right, so let's talk about vulnerability. When you think about building a strong friendship through vulnerability, what does that look like for you in terms of like what you're willing to give and what you maybe expect?
Building a strong friendship through vulnerability. Basically, I would just want, because I'm a vulnerable person, so I would want that person to be a little bit similar to me. So like if I'm asking you how your day was, sometimes people will hold back.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I would want you to just tell the truth. Just like you asked me when I came in,
Mm-hmm.
What's your day like? I'm gonna be honest, it was a little weird. I got a lot going on, but it's like, yeah, I woke up and I was happy. I had a little bit of busyness during the middle of the day, but I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's never, I don't think it's a one-worded thing because our lives are so busy. Everybody has different routines in the morning. Something is going to be on your mind when you wake up.
Right.
You're going to have a task. So that's what I mean. Like being vulnerable is just being honest. Just tell the truth, and we have to create that safe space to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I think once I have it, I'm able to indulge more, but I also will hold back if that space is not given to me. And I try to make sure to do that with people that I'm trying to build a friendship with.
For sure. So that's a good point. Something I'm going to share about myself is that I've told people, I don't share all things with everybody. And so because of that, I have, sometimes people take it as like I'm not being vulnerable or I'm not being honest, right? And so one of the things that I believe to be true is that in friendships and, as you're navigating that, there are levels to those friendships. And then there's like, in those levels, there's this effort of building trust, right? And so building trust it comes from a deeper space, right? It comes from maybe your background, your upbringing. It comes from experiences that you've had in other spaces of life, in other chapters of life, and with other people. And so one of the things I always tell people about me is that there are layers to me. Like, so the
Mm-hmm.
Regina at work may not necessarily be the Regina that hangs out with her close friends on the weekends. And it isn't me being fake, but it is, I believe that that is me being vulnerable in the space that I'm in and building trust, or not even having to build trust. Like, I trust them for as much as I am willing to share. And so when I look at vulnerability, that's what I think about. I think about, that. And also, like, one, being free within myself, like figuring out who I am and being comfortable with who I am in this moment and in this season of life, and being able to say, like, okay, I am going to share, or I'm not going to share. And it doesn't make me any less vulnerable, but it does allow me to navigate that the way that I feel like would be best. And I'm not losing any sleep about it. Now, if you're losing sleep about it, that's a different conversation. But for me, that's how I kind of, that's how I think about vulnerability and being, to your point about open and honest. I will say that I have not always been the best person in terms of communicating my desires or my needs or my wants when I was younger, just because of my background, like because of my background and my family relationship. We didn't have these conversations that was like, we talking about everything. It was like, as the parent in the house was like, I say what I want. This is what this is. This is the standard, and there is no conversation. And so as a child and growing into being a teenager and adulthood, that had to shift for me. And that came as I kind of evolved and grew.
See, for me, I grew up very shy. So when people wanted me to talk, I didn't talk. And so I really think once I fell in love, that's what they say, like, because it's vulnerability, it's a different level.
Okay.
Then it's like, okay, all these bricks have come off. Like, all these layers are being peeled. And I think once that happened for me, then I was able to be more communicative and more open. I just think I suppressed a lot of stuff when I was younger. So now, as I'm older and I'm trying to navigate what adult friendships look like, because they're vastly different from like childhood friendships, I feel that I want to be more communicating. I want to be more in a space, or at least make the space for me and that person to have that vulnerability, and I can tell them like how I really feel, because I will have moments where I'm just like, you're amazing. I really love you. I want to share that. I want to say, hey, I miss you. I haven't seen you. Like, what's going on? If I don't have that comfortable space, then I will suppress it just like I used to when I was younger. And it's not that really an adult thing. Like, people weren't suppressing me to like hold back my feelings. I think it's just I grew up shy. And so I think
like personality.
Yeah. And so ever since when I was younger, from there, I just made myself talk. And now I talk for people that used to talk for me. So it's just
very good.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know. That's life. Life be lifing.
You know what? So you brought up a good point, because I was going to ask you, what does vulnerability look like, right? In relationships, family, friendships. And so you mentioned like being at a space where you're like, you're going to say like, hey, I miss you. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because
You miss me?
I haven't,
I said, you miss me?
No. But what I was going to say is I haven't always done that, right? But there is a freedom in it. And I think that's something that that's what this conversation is for, is to be able to say like, what vulnerability look like is to be able to say what you're being challenged with, and also say what you're feeling, right? Because what you're being challenged with may not always be a feeling. And a lot of times you have people who are like, I don't want to know about what you're feeling. But I think that is where vulnerability comes in, where you're able to voice how you're feeling about something, right? So I have stories for days, guys. So I remember like, being in friendship with someone, but not necessarily, like, again, it goes back to where I was raised. So in my household, my mom didn't ask a lot of questions. Partially this is her own experiences and her maybe not knowing to do it differently, right? Yeah. So as a child, I too wasn't someone that always talked. Not because sometimes, yes, being shy. The other part is like, if it's gonna be peaceful for me, and I don't even know that I thought about it that way, but for me, I'm like, it's not worth having to go down a rabbit's hole about it, right? But being able to be in a space to be like, yo, like, we experienced this together and this is how it made me feel. Not blaming the other person, but being able to present it in a way that people can hear and receive. And I think that is the beauty of vulnerability, like being able to come and say, like, this hurt me, or like, yo, I do miss you. Like, I haven't seen you in like 3 months and we need to link up. And so that was going to be my question, but we kind of answered it. Like, are there other ways that you feel like we can show? Because vulnerability and communication, it sounds from this conversation that it's kind of like a hand-to-hand thing where, like, you have to be willing to allow yourself to feel all of the emotions and still say what it is. And that is, like, pushing through and presenting yourself to be vulnerable. So how do you feel about that?
So heading back to something you said before, one of my friends, we met through work, and she has told me, because I put so much pressure in the past on defining my friendships. I wanted them to be a certain way. Mm-hmm. I wanted one person to fit one size all.
Oh, wow.
And so,
that's a lot of work for one person.
Yeah. And I mean, talking to you, like, guys, we went to Woman Evolve together. And
yes,
basically,
tell all my business. Go ahead.
Basically,
what did I say? Because I say a lot, and I do not be remembering some of the stuff. So what did I say?
Basically, I've known her probably since I was like,
don't tell my age.
10.
Okay. Don't. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I'm in my late 20s.
What do we talk about? Let's skip the age.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. And I was going through it because Sarah was like pulling all of this stuff that we're like waiting on God to give us an answer for. And Regina is like trying to challenge me to like go above and beyond and like switch my flow and like pivot and stuff that I need to do. And I like freaked out. And Regina was helping me communicate my feelings and also like sit there and like be vulnerable. And so I realized, like, during that time and just like listening to other people's opinions and thinking about what would God want, because that's important to me too, I realized that I need different kinds of friendships. Like, I was trying to put everybody in a bubble. You know, like, I wanted this person to be a Christian and like you go outside sometimes. Like, you might cuss a little bit. Like, I wanted that. A little bit. I wanted like all of this one size fit all in this one person. And I realized like I needed multiple friendships. And then sometimes I have to be okay with some of them not becoming my best friend. And you have to be okay with the progress too.
Right.
Because there is some that's going to take a little bit to progress into a deep friendship. And some might just be, this is my going out buddy, you know? I have one guy friend that has just been my rock since we were like in 6th grade, and it's just progressed for years. So I would say that's like 16, 17 years of like a friendship. And he's just been there through everything, but he's not my all around, like, I can do everything. I can't call him and be like, hey, can you come with me here? He'll be like, I got to be on the game at like 7. So like, no, that's not going to happen. And I have girlfriends that fit in different categories. And at first I was against it, but because the type of person that I am, I need that type of complex relationships with different people. But I still have my close friends. But I realized I had to be okay with, hey, you're not going to get all this in one person. And then also you have to be okay with the timing of things progressing. You can't force things to go into, oh, she's going to be my best friend. When you meet.
What a part of this involves me?
Because
did I say all of this stuff, or it was like conversations.
You basically push me to connect out of my comfort zone.
Okay.
Because I was shy in a sense because I wanted to make a new friend and I didn't know how. And you were just like, why won't you do it? And I was like, I don't know how to go about it. Like, I don't. And you're like, just go with it. And God was already telling me to do it. So it's like he gave you the ammunition to basically say, go. And so I went out and I was vulnerable and it's progressing now still. But it's just the thing. It's just the thing of like, he was using you to basically, because she likes to like.
Sure. Go ahead.
You're like.
Challenges?
Yeah, like, I do. Yeah,
we'll
like banter.
We'll bring you back for that episode as well. Challenging.
Like you do a banter thing. And it's like, it's a challenging banter. Yeah, but it's a challenging banter.
It is called.
And sometimes it's very healthy. And sometimes I'm like, girl, you got to go. Like, this is enough. But during that moment, last September, it reshaped me. I needed that during that time. Because if I didn't get that, then I wouldn't be where I am right now with some of my friends.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So kudos to you.
I mean, I'm pretty dope.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that a lot of stretching and challenging has also been something that has been done for me by other friends, right? So me being vulnerable. So I had a conversation with a friend recently, and the young lady was asking me about why something, I want to say it right. Basically, I had done something. And so when the person circled back to ask me about it, just in conversation and questioning, I was like, I gave an answer. And so essentially when the young lady circled back, she's like, why didn't you just say X, Y, and Z? When she asked me again, she's like, why didn't you just say it from the beginning? And I'm like, well, I didn't want to have that conversation with you.
Yeah.
And so what it took, though, in that moment for me was to be vulnerable enough to tell her that the reason I made this decision and only did this one thing was because I did not want to tell you that I couldn't do something at 100%. So I did it in a way that I'm like, I still want to do it, but I can't do all of it, right? And so she's like, but we're tighter than that. Like, I'm not like, she's like, I'm not asking you for this. I understand it's something you want to do. And it's okay for you to tell me, like, I want to do this for you. And here's my challenge with it. And it's going to take me a little, like, and so again, one thing that I stress all the time is like, I am no guru at this, but I live in it and I am very passionate about this. And so being vulnerable does require you to take down the walls of like trying to know everything, sometimes vulnerability requires us to not figure everything out for the other person because we actually end up harming them more than we help them because we're like, well, if I'm vulnerable and saying this, or bringing my full self or being raw and honest, to your point, then we actually hurt the other parties involved because they're like, if you just would have told me from the beginning, we could have worked on this together. But I think a lot of times we try to like...
It's people pleasing.
Well, not people pleasing, but for me, a lot of times I want to show up to the friendship just as... I want to be just as present as the other person is being for me. Like I've experienced a lot within the last few years, and this doesn't take away from anybody else, but there have been times when I'm like, I felt like I was pulling on a friend or some friends far more than I should have. And it wasn't something that they told me. This is something that I created in my mind. So now it causes me to shift my vulnerability or my level of communication when they're like, no, like, don't do that. Like, this is not, And so vulnerability, again, what it looks like is like being honest enough to be like, like, I'm not okay. So like, I remember having to call a friend and my sister and I'm like, I'm not okay in this space. And because I'm not okay, I need you guys. And so here's what I would like to see happen. Now, everybody don't always have all of that figured out. Sometimes all you have is the phone call and say, I'm not okay, and that you leave it at that. But the beauty in all of that was being able to share that and not have any, not feel like I was lesser than a person by showing them like, no, in this space, I don't have anything. I'm essentially like bending at my knees because I need all of this help. And being okay with needing the help, right? Like we need each other to thrive and live a life. So Yeah, that is my whole spiel. I can go down the rabbit's hole. The next thing I was gonna say is like, how are you exercising, making sure that you're, doing your due diligence of managing your vulnerability, like knowing when to do it and when not to. And also just being communicative, like opening up conversations and being able to articulate like what you need in those friendships.
I am realizing too that they say like in marriage you need to leave your expectations down for your significant other.
Tell me more.
I feel like you need to do the same thing with your friendships too.
Okay.
We have this expectation of how things want to go. You can communicate it to them,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a false reality because you have pictures for everything and it's not going to come out how you want it to. There's sometimes
That's like, why we have multiple shots.
I have a friendship meeting
Mm-hmm.
like later on at night.
Okay.
And I have an expectation of how I want it to go.
Yes.
But you already know that it could go even better or it could just be mediocre. We don't know. The place might ruin it. I don't know. But it's just, we have to lower our heavy expectations on people because we're people, we're going to fall.
Mm.
And I had to have that conversation recently to another friend because I put pressure on her because I was going through a rough time and I didn't know how to communicate how I was feeling. Then I made the space and then I don't know what to say. I'm just like, I don't know how I feel. Like the words weren't coming out, but I'm like, I'm ready to have this conversation. But we did have it and it was great. But it's still, to me, I really feel like expectations need to be lowered a little bit. Yes, we want to have things with people and you can communicate that to them, but we have to give room for error. And sometimes God will tell you to just listen and watch somebody's body language because I've done that. I'm doing that now. Because some people, just because you're open doesn't mean that that person isn't open yet. Maybe it's something they're waiting on from you so they can like open up. So there is times where you're going to have to just be, hey, how you doing? What's going on? You just be there. Be still and be there. And he'll do the rest. I'm learning that I'm incorporating a lot of prayer in mine because that requires vulnerability. I did a vulnerability prayer like maybe 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And God has just been challenging me in every area of my life with vulnerability. And even just with people that I've been close with for years, that's requiring that. I'm realizing people have busy schedules and stuff. And so, and you're trying to find a balance because, like I said, childhood friendships versus adult friendships are completely different.
What makes them different?
Because childhood, I feel like you could just call that friend and they have nothing going on. They're not working.
Right.
They'll show up for you in the ways you want them to. Those expectations can be met. You're going to see them at school. You're going to see them at church or whatever you may, have first met them, But in adulthood, you actually have to plan it out. You have to schedule it.
Shout out to the calendar invites because I use mine heavily.
Like one of my friends, well, I have two that's like in the healthcare field. And I was telling her yesterday, I said, like, you're going to have to plan stuff out. Because like, if you don't tell me that, like, hey, I want to see you, then I'm going to fall back. I'm be like, I'm waiting on you. Because I've already voiced it, but because your life is different and mine is kind of the same, you gotta plan it out. Because I don't want to be the planner for you. You gotta show me that, hey, yeah, I do want to see you, but I am communicating, but I want to see you. Like we got to figure that out. We're in different layers now because we're adults, and I feel like adult friendships are very hard. You have people that have kids. You have people that work 24/7 jobs. You're taking care of parents. You just got a lot on you. And so it's telling that person how you want them to show up. Yes, you can hold them accountable, but that's a part of being vulnerable too. When you have that space sometimes to just go to that person wherever they are, if you want to see them and just showing up and just being there, that might mean something to them, to open that space up to be vulnerable in the future, for them to tell you, hey, this is what's going on. I noticed like you showed up for me, so I'm just going to tell you what's going on, because you've been here. And I've seen that do well for me too. But it's communicating, it's being patient. And I've just learned prayer has like really helped me to like stop like forcing a lot of stuff, because he's given me discernment. So I can look at somebody's body language and know how I need to move. Sometimes you can assume somebody has an attitude, but it might not be an attitude with you. It might just be what they got going on at that moment. It could be their job. It could be anything.
For sure.
So you can even just give somebody, like, you have to find out their love language too. That's another thing. Love languages.
That's another show.
Oh, it is.
Don't go into that. Don't go in that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So far, do you feel like with yourself practicing vulnerability and being more open to communicating like your needs or your desires or your challenges or your grievances? I like using grievances. Do you feel like that has been rewarding or daunting for you, or both?
Reiterate the question one more time.
Being able to express your vulnerability and exercise it and being communicative with others, do you feel like it has been rewarding for you or daunting, or both?
It's both.
Both. Okay.
And it depends on the season, and it depends on what the friendship has been like for each person. Each thing is going to be different. At times, like right now, I may be dealing with something that's daunting, because it's like I said, sometimes you have those waiting periods to be like, okay, when are they going to feel like they can tell me how they really feel? Or have they actually settled with themselves to know what's going on within so they can tell me?
So does that matter? Does it matter if you're in a friendship and you are like, I'm being vulnerable, I'm exercising vulnerability? Does it matter to you if the other person is being vulnerable or not?
Yes, it does.
Why?
Because I'm this open book most of the time. And so if I'm coming around you a lot and you're not showing that a little bit, I worry that I may be hoping for something that may never happen. But that's also a little bit of insecurity too that could be taking place.
Okay.
But you can't make somebody be vulnerable either.
For sure.
And so that's why I said, like, you have to have the room to let God define it, basically. And so that's why I was saying the older we get, it's requiring so much patience to literally let God define what this is, Like sometimes I'll ask God, like, hey, can I have this conversation with this person? Like to see what's going on, like what's the flow here? And he'll be like, just be still.
Yeah.
And just wait.
Yeah. Just leave it for now.
Yeah. And it's not that he's saying no. It's just the timing. And he'll show you, like I said, body language.
Let me find out you need a Christian podcast.
I've thought about it.
So let me say this. So I'm asking these questions because I was kind of looking through some reading and all of the things. And one of the things that it talks about with being vulnerable and being more communicative is it talks about but how being vulnerable, like starting that and nurturing that is daunting, but it's also rewarding when you do it and you do it
and it comes
well.
Through. Yeah.
It also talks about how like you thrive with being vulnerable when you build trust. So like having your levels of friendship and trust, that helps your level of vulnerability. One of the things that I want to deep dive into is like oversharing. How do you know that you're not oversharing? And I'm asking that question because I undershare. And I know that. I undershare with most people.
Yeah, that's true.
That is how it will be categorized. I undershare. There are people where I will share. I'm not oversharing. I don't see it as oversharing, but I share. They know more. than like the average person, right? And a part of that is where they're placed in my life, the proximity of our relationship, not just in geographical location, but proximity to the heart, experience and time. And so I am always like on the chopping block because people are like, you don't share enough, right? And so in my little research, it talks about how like you got to build trust. It also reiterates something that I already knew, is that people enjoy sharing because that helps people feel like they know you. It helps people feel like they are close to you. So if, I used to have this idea that if I ever got like terminally ill, I wouldn't tell anybody.
Really?
And so,
well, I can see that.
But, right. So let me tell you why, though. So I had this idea that, like, if I got terminally ill or something really, like, something was happening with me, I'm like, I wouldn't tell anybody because I felt like I was protecting them from, like, all of this grief, that the process of it, right? Because we don't know a person's, like, some people get sick and it's 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 days, 3 years, 30 years. And so for me, I'm like, well, if I could continue life as normal without intercepting their lives with this information, life would be better for them. But that changed when I became a godmother 8 years ago, because what I realized is I am so ingrained into their lives is that it wouldn't be fair to them if something happened to me and in 3 days when they had just seen me, I'm no longer here. Or something happens to me and they're like, we just saw her yesterday.
Yeah, what you mean you don't went down?
Because they're also very much in the know to ask questions. They are very much in the know to, like, they're inquisitive. Like, they want to know. Like, they're like, your foot is swollen. Why? What happened? Or if I make a sound and I'm like, ooh, they're like, what's wrong? I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I can't hear that. I feel like it's connected to my vision. But when we're together, they instantly notice things. And so I have learned to be more mindful, which in turn then says to me, like, I need to be more upfront and communicating and more vulnerable to share, because what they have taught me is that every other person in my life that is important to me and I'm important to theirs, I need to share. Like, even if it's like, I don't have to share, like, okay, we think it's this, but when I know for sure, I need to communicate it timely, because what happens is if something happens on the drop of a dime, y'all gonna be like, we just saw her yesterday.
Now, why she kept that a secret?
Right, and she didn't tell us nothing. And so...
She being shady.
Right, and that brings a whole nother level of something, right? So... I am working through that. I am not perfect, but I am definitely working through that in terms of, I don't believe in oversharing, and I don't believe in oversharing because oversharing doesn't prove that you're vulnerable. Oversharing doesn't prove that you are giving me more than whatever. Like, oversharing can be daunting. It is never rewarding, but it could be daunting because sometimes in oversharing, especially if I'm a tier 3 in your life, but to me, you're a tier 1, you oversharing some stuff to me also assumes that we're on the same wavelength of receiving information. Yeah. And that may scare me. You know what I mean? Like, there needs to be some spaces. And I think it's for anybody. I could be wrong, but for me, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to know what happened to you at such and such. Like, over time, we can build that space to where I'm okay, I can receive it, and because everybody isn't open to all things.
Or like it could be like overstimulating, like
for sure,
for that other person, because you might not even realize they might have a lot of stuff going on,
right?
And so you putting that weight on them.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, here's everything in my bag.
And sometimes, listen to this. Like, sometimes that you don't mean it in a bad way. It's literally just like, that might be your way of like quality time. It's not necessarily like venting for hours. No, it could just be, hey, I want to be honest with you. If you see something off, this is why. But you also have to give that person a space too, for them to just be like, I really want to know what's going on, but I have a lot going on in my head and I don't want to be super worried about it. And that sounds about you. That sounds terrible, but it's like, it's just learning that everybody can't have all what you got going on their weight, even though we're supposed to carry each other's burdens. But it's like,
In time.
I'm starting to learn, like, what exactly does that mean? Like, how deep do we have to go?
Well, I think that's like a part of us like figuring out how to exercise vulnerability, right? And like you mentioned earlier, friendship is not a one size fit all.
Mm-mm.
And so, you might be able to share something with me because I can be more receptive and I'm more receiving and I can carry it.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually not just carrying it, but like having friends where like maybe prayer is the key to it, or like I can help you work through a plan. So for me, it's not like settling in my spirit or in my space because I know how to kind of manage it and maneuver it, where someone else, you tell them the same weighted story and they may go and like jump off a bridge. And that wasn't your intent, but you also didn't know.
Yeah.
And so, and because they didn't communicate back to you, like, hey, don't tell me the whole story right now. Like, I need a few days before we talk about, like you say, hey, I don't talk to you about, you're like, don't tell me about the heartbreak because it's going to send me, like, I have a friend where it's like, every time I have tried to say something, she's like, She's like, no, because I'm still looking at that person sideways. And I'm like, okay, we won't talk about that anymore. Or, there's a friend of mine where there are things where we're like, once we talk about it, we put it in a vault and we don't go back to touch it because they're like, it's going to be too much for me because it's a lot. So I think that is a part of also exercising that level, your level of vulnerability.
Like you might have to ask sometimes. Like, sometimes you just want to just pick up the phone and call somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we have to ask, are you in a space where you want to hear what I got going on?
That's good. That is
yeah,
real
that just
good
came to
do.
me.
No? Oh, yeah, like that's real good. Yeah, because, and I think yes, I like that because again, it gives the other person the right and the responsibility to themselves to be like, today ain't the day for me to hear.
But if you want them people like me, that's like, fearing rejection, then you'd be like, oh, damn.
So then that means it goes back to the vulnerability. Because you can't take it personal. Like today is just, today is a lot.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll recircle back, reconvene.
For sure.
That's my favorite word. So, like reconvene, we're going to reconvene later about it. And God may bring it back up where y'all can talk about it. That has happened to me before too. And I love that.
Yeah, I do this thing where like me and my sister do it. Another friend of mine, we do this. And I have a cousin where we do this. And it's like, girl, so we need to debrief. And the debrief is really kind of like whatever you envision that to be in corporate, where like you're in this boardroom and you're like talking about, that is what we do girl time on the phone, in person, on video. And it's very helpful and it's very therapeutic, might I add, right?
Yeah.
Because, like I'm also a person where like in the moment, I'm not going to pop off, or that's not my goal. Yeah. I may have done it and I may do it, but my goal is never to pop off. And so sometimes when some of my friends who are very weighty in their conversations, because for whatever reason, so a lot of times I don't have any feedback in the moment. I try not to. Not that I don't care, but I try to like allow them to be vulnerable. Yeah. Allow them to communicate that. And then allow it to kind of settle, and then we come back. And so, but also understanding that it's not always required. Like having a debrief or feedback is not always required. That's how I'm like, no, sometimes you need to talk to me.
We gotta have that. We gotta have a space, not a big space, but at least something to be like, we on the same page a little bit.
But we don't have to be, to me, we don't have to be on the same page. It's like, if this is your space of being vulnerable, this isn't about me being vulnerable in your space. Like if we're talking about something between you and I, yes. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. Oh. If you had to rate your level of vulnerability between you and I, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
Girl, what?
But,
from a 1 out of 10, or like what
let's
are we doing?
do 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest.
We probably at like a 3.5 or a 4. It depends on the season, to be honest.
I was gonna say a 3.5 too. So we are on the same wavelength. So yeah, no,
you
cool.
Definitely not a 2.
I just want to check in, just want to check in. So I want to thank you for today's conversation. Any final feedback or thoughts about our topic of building strong friendships through vulnerability and communication?
You got to define what type of friendships you want. You have to allow the space for people, give them the space to be vulnerable. Patience, heavy patience, and prayer.
Yes, prayer and patience.
Because you can't just go in forcing people to talk. And I'm learning that, it's a time. It's a time. You got to just be patient, because God will let the right person be vulnerable to you. And being vulnerable does not mean, hey, man, I failed this test and it was terrible. Like, me and my guy just broke up, and then I did this other like silly shit the other night. Like, it might not be like the type of stuff where it's like, oh my God, I just went through this terrible breakup. It might not be that. It might just be like, hey, I embarrassed myself the other day. Like, it's different levels of vulnerability. Just be okay with what you get. You can also leave the friendship if it's not serving you to. But I just know I don't have it figured out, but I'm learning it. I'm learning to just be patient. And I really think that's like the key thing. And just practice that discernment, because that goes a long way. And if you follow God, you'll know what I'm talking about, because you'll know how to handle people. Even with business relationships, you can have that same thing. It's just noticing things, peeping stuff, It's not you being nosy. It's just you got to make sure you're being vulnerable in that, not necessarily being vulnerable. Let's take that back. You're showing up in that space, and you're assessing the room, and you're knowing in the future how to show up, and it's okay to be patient with it. But if it's getting on your nerves, walk away.
Well, thank you. I want to add one thing to that feedback about, hopefully I don't forget, but I want to add, like, making sure that we acknowledge people's efforts of vulnerability. Something that I try to practice is like, thank you for sharing. And sometimes people will laugh, and that is not me being funny or, but this is me acknowledging that, like,
that took a lot for you.
Yeah. Like, I realize that in this space, you know what I mean? Like, this is may be a lot. It's taking a lot. And also add to that, like, acknowledging people's vulnerability in those spaces, but also, as the person who is sharing, also being receptive to the person who is receiving, because sometimes we require a response from people that in the moment they may not have. And they may never have it. That we'll talk about at a different time, but just allowing that level of grace of like, okay, because we don't always prepare people for like, hey, I'm about to really get down and dirty with you. So again, thank you for today. I want to go into a quote of the day. So we always wrap with a quote of the day, a friendship quote. And so the quote of the day says, a friend is someone who knows all about you and still loves you. So I want to share that with you.
I like that.
So as we conclude Friendships That Flourish podcast, again, this episode, we talked about building strong friendships through vulnerability and communication. We are reminded of the value of authentic connections and how it enriches our lives, fostering and serving a sense of belonging. I want to encourage each of you to apply that insight this week in your lives, and remember to listen to us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Friends That Flourish. Thank you so much. I am your friend host, Regina Nicole.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Friendships That Flourish, the podcast with your host, Regina Nicole. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms, and be sure to listen to us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Don't forget to email us any of your topics and questions at friendsthatflourish@gmail.com.